is, as I said, the third time Confederate forces are above the Potomac. Now, I'm sure most of you all are familiar with the first two times. The Maryland campaign in 1862 passes right through here. In fact, we would have been amongst Confederate camps in September of 1862 during the Maryland campaign. The Army of Northern Virginia is camped all around us before they move into Frederick and west towards Sharpsburg, and of course the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American military history. The Federal Army of the Potomac follows in their wake, so this area would actually have both of the major armies here in the east pass over this ground in 1862. In 1863, the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia moves into Maryland yet again, crossing the Potomac, but they're much further west of us. Now, there would be some Confederate cavalry that comes here into Frederick, but for the most part, the Army is moving further to the west, passing through Maryland and up into Pennsylvania for the Gettysburg campaign, back to Virginia. So we've seen these armies pass over this ground significantly already by 1864.
We are Battle Monocacy, and our first stop is this farm. In the Civil War, the family may have hunkered down in the basement, or they went a mile away to another family member's house.
This one, it was one very similar to it. The idea was that you'd bring your wagon inside. You'll notice it has all of these upper doors. That's so that you could actually take stuff off the top of the wagon and put them in the doors, and it would just drop down, and then you would access it again from the lower doors. On the sides here, you can also get up into the hayloft above. Lynchburg, Virginia is an important transportation town. The railroads that are coming from the Shenandoah Valley pass through Lynchburg. By this point, the wheels of the War Department have begun to turn, and Grant has sent reinforcements from the Richmond-Petersburg front down the James River and up the Chesapeake Bay all the way to Baltimore. Veteran troops from the Army of the Potomac. That is desperately needed because, in fact, the fighting begins about 2.5 miles to the northeast of us, as Confederate forces had tried to go down the National Road. Now, the Ohio National Guard. Well, those Ohio boys, they're 100 Days men, and they're going to put up such a good fight that the Confederates essentially say, forget it, across this landscape. Skirmishing, sharpshooting, and a whole lot of artillery fire. Is Jubal Early. He's not on the battlefield. Any guesses where he's at? He's back in Frederick, ransoming the city. He's going to demand $200,000 of the citizens of Frederick, Maryland. $200,000 is a lot of money today.
Yeah.
$200,000 in 1864 money is about $3.6 million today. Civilians and their negotiations, that he turns the discussions over to his staff officers, and he comes out here to the battlefield, arriving between 11 and 11:30 in the morning. They go on a bit of a spree. They get themselves a nice lunch, have some champagne, even a little ice cream to finish off the meal. So not a bad way to wrap up a hot day in July. Regiments on the battlefield, we only have 5, and this is one of the few that's dedicated to a single regiment. The 14th New Jersey is known as the Monocacy Regiment because it spent so much time here between 1862 and 63. That bridge will be burned during the battle, and we'll touch on that as we get to our next stop. Just before we make a right here on to Baker Valley Road, on your left is the Pennsylvania date marker. There are 3 regiments listed on that. And then, of course, hiding in the corner here to our right is the 10th Vermont Infantry, the regiment on this field that actually earned 2 different Medals of Honor for its actions here. And that fence line will be utilized by Federal forces as they're dealing with the first Confederate attacks that get over the river. Family live here. They actually watch the battle across this landscape, and hiding in the basement is young Glenn Worthington, 6 years old at the time of the fighting. He's actually hiding in the basement and watching the battle through this lower window here underneath the porch, and he would be so inspired, horrified, what have you, by this fighting, that he would become not only a lawyer and a judge here in Frederick County, but the first chronicler of the Monocacy campaign. On the opposite side of the river, the Confederates have been stymied that morning at the bridges, and so they're looking at other options here to turn his veteran troops from facing north to facing west towards the threat. was where the fence line was that Ricketts' men are hunkered down behind. For a withering volley into the Confederate advance, knocking them back. In fact, it is said that when this volley went off, the Confederates in their front literally disappeared. Not because necessarily they were all hit, but because they dove for cover. They were advancing through about waist-high corn, and they're going to crawl back here to the Worthington property, rally behind the house, and really try to figure out what exactly is in their front, because they've just run into something far harder than any militia. Road and actually unhinge this Federal position, forcing Ricketts and his men to fall back across the Thomas Farm. The Confederates capture the Thomas Farm buildings. We can see their barn out there. We can see some of the secondary structures through the trees. The Confederates capture those structures. This time falling back through Gordon's ranks. And one of Gordon's brigade commanders, Clement Evans, will call out and mock his fellow Confederates, telling the men around him, "Come on, Georgians, let's show these cavalrymen how to fight. It's just 100 days, men, and can't stand up to our troops." Well, Clement Evans, he and his Georgians will attack this Federal line 3 times. The Federal line are exactly what Gordon here is looking for, because this Federal line runs off to the north towards the Monocacy River, and with all of the attacks hammering this end of the line, that's going to cause the Federals to shift men to this part of the line, weakening their center and right. Exactly what Gordon is looking for, because he unleashes his Louisianans into that weakened Federal center, and his Virginia troops into the Federal right, close to the river, driving them back across the Thomas Farm property, forcing this part of the Federal line, Truex's brigade, to also fall back. They will fall back through the Thomas Farm buildings. We literally have fighting going on through the house at one point, as they're falling back towards, across these fields, towards that line out there in the distance. Can everybody see that thick band of trees? Not the one in the middle of the field, but the one on the far side. Right. That's Araby Church Road. We were running up that road earlier. We're going to go back, hammered back, and trying it again. This deadly seesawing action that we see on so many battlefields. This battle is being fought in 90-some degree heat, brutally hot, and the wounded of both sides are dragging themselves to any water source. Can everybody? John Brown Gordon, a veteran of most of the major fights in the American Civil War here in the East, would say in his after-action report, though I had seen it or heard it said on many battlefield landscapes, it was only here at Monocacy where I literally saw the waters stained red with blood.
The museum area inside the visitor center was temporarily closed when we visited. It's expected to reopen in the fall of 2025. In the meantime, we visited the Tenant House Museum located at the Thomas Farm. It explores the land that is now the battlefield through the lens of the area as a literal crossroads of history. American Indians, French immigrants, free and enslaved African Americans, farmers and millers who lived and worked on this land. It was also serving as a temporary visitor center.
Currently on was part of the Georgetown Pike in 1864, and it was an embanked road. So Federal forces, when they fell back to this road, they had this embankment to hunker down behind, and they're going to use this much like a trench over the course of the fighting from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 5. But by 5 o'clock, unzipped and began to fall back past us here, moving off to the east, eventually to the northeast, striking the Baltimore Pike and moving back towards Baltimore. His march lost on his way to Washington, D.C., and 900 men killed, wounded, or missing in action following the fighting here. Now, the Confederates do pursue briefly. They gobble up several hundred Federal POWs. The Federal losses here are just about 1,200 men. Or actually, almost 1,300 men, excuse me. To Monocacy Junction, to the Thomas Farm area, and go into camp. The hardest marching these veteran Confederates would have during the war, according to their own words. But they would reach the outskirts of Washington, D.C. around midday on July 11th. They begin to skirmish with the forts on the very edges of the District of Columbia. By the end of the day, Jubal Early recognizes that he will not be breaking into Washington and is preparing his forces to withdraw back to Virginia, telling one of his staff officers, "Well, Major, we may not have taken Washington, but we scared old Abe like hell."